A major company is closing a very large plant. On Friday, November 21st, 2025, Tyson Foods made an announcement. It said it would permanently close its beef processing facility. The plant is in Lexington, Nebraska. The final day of operations is set for January 20th, 2026. This is not just a local news story. This decision sends shockwaves far beyond the small town. It signals a significant shift in the American beef industry. The closure is a direct response to a crisis that has been building for years. The Lexington plant is a giant in the meatpacking world, one of the largest beef processing facilities in the United States. Inside its walls, workers can handle nearly 5,000 cattle every single day. That is a massive amount of beef. This one plant accounts for approximately 4.8% of the total daily U.S. beef slaughter. Its closure is not a small adjustment. It is a major disruption. First time one of the Big Four has permanently shut a major plant during the current cattle supply crunch. The official notice was stark. A mass layoff of 3,212 Tyson workers will happen on or around January 20th. In a small city like Lexington, with a population of about 10,000, this number is staggering. Nearly a third of the entire city will be out of work in days. These are not just statistics. These are people. Mothers, fathers, neighbors, friends. For 30 years, the daily rhythm of this rural city has been tied to the plant's shifts. The sound of workers coming and going was the town's heartbeat. Soon, that heartbeat will come to a halt. The human cost is immense and deeply personal. These jobs are more than income. They are the anchor for thousands of families. The closure of a single plant in a small town might seem isolated, but the economic impact will be felt across the entire state of Nebraska. Researchers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, UNL, conducted an analysis to understand the full scope of the damage. Their findings are staggering. The statewide economic loss, including both direct and ripple effects, is estimated at an incredible $3.28 billion every year. This is not just about the lost wages of the plant workers. It is about the entire economic ecosystem that supported the plant and its employees. The closure creates a massive hole in the state's economy. The job losses extend far beyond the 3,212 workers at the Tyson plant. The UNL study projects that more than 7,000 jobs will be lost statewide. This is because every job at the plant supports other jobs in the economy. Think about the cattle ranchers who sold their livestock to Tyson. Think about the trucking companies that transported the cattle and the finished beef. Think about the equipment suppliers. Think about the veterinarians. Think about the grain farmers. The total loss in labor income is projected to be $530.41 million per year. This is a massive blow to working families across Nebraska. To understand why Tyson is closing the Lexington plant, you have to follow the money. The company's decision was not made lightly. It was driven by massive financial losses in its beef business. According to Tyson's own financial reports, the company was facing a severe crisis. In its fiscal year 2025, which ended in September, Tyson reported that its costs for buying cattle had skyrocketed. Those costs rose by nearly $2 billion compared to the year before. This huge increase in expenses made it incredibly difficult for the company to make a profit on processing beef. The numbers paint a clear picture of financial distress. For that same fiscal year, the company posted an adjusted loss of $426 million just from its beef business. The company was bleeding cash, and it needed to stop the bleeding. In their fiscal report released on November 10, 2025, Tyson executives projected that the beef segment would continue to lose money. They forecast losses between $400 million and $600 million. The problems at the Tyson plant in Lexington are a symptom of a much larger national crisis. The United States is facing a historic shortage of beef cattle. The nation's beef cattle herd has shrunk to its smallest size since the 1950s. This is not a problem that happened overnight. It is the result of years of compounding pressures on American ranchers. Years of severe drought, particularly in key cattle-producing states like Texas, Oklahoma, have made it difficult and expensive to feed and water the animals. Ranchers were forced to sell off parts of their herds just to survive. This process is known as liquidation. High operational costs have also squeezed ranchers. The price of everything from fuel feed veterinary care has gone up. This has made it harder for ranchers to make a profit. Faced with rising costs and difficult environmental conditions, many have decided to reduce the size of their herds or get out of the business altogether. As the community of Lexington reels from the news of the plant closure, the economic shockwaves are just the beginning. Now, a fierce political and legal battle is starting to brew, one that taps into a century-old debate about corporate power in America's heartland. The closure has drawn sharp criticism and triggered serious accusations against Tyson Foods, one of the largest meat processors in the world. These aren't just whispers of discontent. They are public declarations of a fight to come. Across the street from the beef plant that is set to close, Nebraska U.S. Senate candidate Dan Osborne held a press conference, positioning himself at the epicenter of the controversy. He did not mince words. He accused the company of breaking a federal law that is more than a century old, a landmark piece of legislation designed to prevent exactly this kind of scenario. He claimed that Tyson's actions are a calculated form of market manipulation. The core of his argument is that this isn't just about one company's bottom line. It's about a corporate giant allegedly using its immense market power to artificially constrain the nation's beef processing capacity, designed to boost its own profits at the expense of everyone else, from the rancher to the consumer. The law at the center of this accusation is the Packers and Stockyards Act. This federal law was passed in 1921, during an era when a handful of powerful meatpacking companies, known as the Big Five, controlled the industry. They were accused of collusion, price fixing, and crushing smaller competitors. The act was a direct response, a trust-busting effort to ensure a level playing field. Its purpose was to regulate the industry and prevent large meatpacking companies from using their market power to engage in anti-competitive or deceptive practices. The law was designed to ensure a fair and open market for both livestock producers, who need competitive bids for their cattle, and for consumers, who deserve fair prices at the grocery store. Osborne argues that Tyson is violating the spirit and the letter of this law. He called the move to close the plant and, crucially, not sell it to a competitor who could keep it running, a deliberate act of market manipulation. The logic behind the accusation is this. By taking a major processing facility offline, Tyson reduces the overall demand for cattle in the region. With fewer buyers, ranchers may be forced to accept lower prices for their livestock. At the same time, reducing the national supply of processed beef could drive up wholesale and retail prices, benefiting Tyson's remaining operational plants. These are serious allegations. For its part, Tyson maintains that its decision was based purely on business realities. The company points to a nationwide cattle shortage, which has driven up the cost of livestock, and its own reported financial losses as the sole drivers of the closure. They frame it not as a strategic play, but as a painful necessity in a challenging market. The accusations of market manipulation will likely lead to calls for government investigations. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is responsible for enforcing the Packers and Stockyards Act, could be petitioned to open a formal inquiry. Such an investigation would scrutinize Tyson's internal communications and financial reasoning behind the closure. Beyond federal oversight, the situation could also result in significant legal challenges, potentially through class action lawsuits brought by cattle producers who believe they've been financially harmed. The central question for any court or investigator will be intent. Was this a reasonable business decision or a calculated move to manipulate the market? The answer will have profound implications, not just for Lexington, but for the entire American food supply chain. The closure of the Lexington plant. It is not an isolated event. It is part of a larger trend reducing the nation's beef processing capacity. While shutting down a single slaughterhouse might not seem catastrophic, the scale of the Lexington facility makes its loss significant. But Tyson's cuts don't stop there. The company announced plans to reduce operations at another major plant. It will cut one of 2 shifts at the Amarillo, Texas facility. That move will eliminate another 1,700 jobs. The combined impact is substantial. Full closure in Lexington, partial shutdown in Amarillo. Together they cut U.S. beef processing capacity by an estimated 7 to 9%. That's a huge reduction in a short time. The food supply chain will have less flexibility and be more vulnerable. The system is becoming more fragile. Even if ranchers rebuilt herds tomorrow, it would take years to get cattle to market weight, and there will be fewer places to process them. With the closure of the Tyson plant now a reality, the immediate focus must be on the people who have lost their jobs. The shutdown isn't just an economic event. It's a personal crisis for thousands of individuals and their families who built their lives around this facility. The first and most critical step is to provide a robust safety net for these displaced workers. This requires a coordinated, rapid response effort from local, state, and federal agencies, working in unison to manage the fallout. Immediate support comes in many forms. Job fairs are being organized to connect workers with new opportunities. However, many roles at the plant were highly specialized. Therefore, comprehensive retraining programs are essential. These programs help workers translate their existing experience and learn new, in-demand skills for different industries, from advanced manufacturing to healthcare. Beyond employment, there's the urgent need for financial assistance and counseling services. These resources are vital to help families navigate the difficult transition, manage household budgets without a steady income, and cope with the immense stress and uncertainty that unemployment brings. The psychological toll of a plant closure can be just as devastating as the financial one. For the town of Lexington and the state of Nebraska, the challenge is to rebuild the local economy. The plant was more than an employer. It was the engine of the community. Its closure creates a ripple effect, impacting the housing market as families may be forced to relocate, leading to a drop in school enrollment and shrinking the local tax base that funds essential services like fire departments, libraries, and road maintenance. State and local leaders will work to attract new businesses to the area, using tools like tax incentives, grants, and investments in infrastructure to encourage a company to move into the now vacant Tyson facility. However, finding a single employer to replace over 3,000 jobs is a monumental task, and perhaps not the most resilient strategy. A more likely approach is to attract multiple smaller businesses. This would diversify the local economy, making it less vulnerable to the decisions of a single large corporation in the future. But this is a long and difficult process, essential for the community's long-term survival. The shockwave extends far beyond the town limits, hitting cattle producers and ranchers across the region. The loss of a major buyer like the Lexington plant fundamentally alters the market landscape, forcing them to find new destinations for their livestock. For many, this means transporting cattle over much longer distances to other processing facilities, which significantly increases freight costs and cuts into already thin profit margins. This also introduces greater basis risk, the difference between the local cash price and the futures market, making their income more volatile. In response, some producers may explore different business models to regain control. This could involve selling directly to consumers through farmers markets or online platforms, or forming cooperatives with other ranchers to collectively market their cattle and negotiate better terms. Others might pivot to niche markets like grass-fed or organic beef, which can command premium prices but require different production methods and certifications. Government agencies like the USDA will be closely monitoring cattle prices and market conditions, providing support and information to ranchers. This event also brings renewed focus to federal oversight, particularly the Packers and Stockyards Act, a century-old law designed to ensure fair competition and trade practices in the livestock industry. Investigations may be launched to ensure the market remains competitive in the wake of the closure. On a national scale, the closure impacts the entire beef supply chain. The U.S. meat processing industry is highly concentrated, with a few large companies controlling the majority of the market. Losing a facility of this size reduces the nation's overall slaughter capacity, even if by a small percentage. This makes the entire system more fragile and sensitive to disruptions, whether from maintenance downtime at other plants, extreme weather events, or disease outbreaks. A bottleneck anywhere in this tightened system can quickly lead to problems for both producers and consumers. For consumers, the effects may not be immediate but are significant. In the short term, there could be price volatility for beef as the supply chain adjusts. Shoppers might notice changes in the availability of certain cuts or products at their local grocery store. Over the long term, continued consolidation in the processing sector could lead to higher average prices and fewer choices on the shelf. This highlights the delicate balance of a system that connects a rancher in Nebraska to a dinner table hundreds of miles away. The road ahead is one of adjustment and rebuilding. For the cattle industry, herd cycles are long. Decisions made today about breeding and retention won't be felt in the beef supply for 2 to 3 years. For the community of Lexington, attracting new investment and diversifying its economy is a marathon, not a sprint. And for the workers and their families, the path forward involves navigating uncertainty while building a new future. The closure of the Tyson plant is a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of our food system, our economy, and the lives at the heart of it all. The story of the Tyson plant closure in Lexington is about more than just one company or one town. It's a microcosm of a much larger, more complex issue unfolding across the nation. This single event forces us to confront fundamental questions about the future of America's food supply, the delicate balance of power in our economy, and our collective responsibility to the communities that feed the country. As the dust settles in Lexington, a number of critical questions remain, casting long shadows over the heartland. And as many are discovering, none of them have easy answers. The most immediate question for the town is, will another company step in to buy and reopen the plant? Given the current cattle shortage, finding a buyer willing to take on such a large facility seems unlikely in the short term. The economics are challenging, but it remains a possibility that local and state leaders will aggressively pursue, offering incentives to attract a new operator. The alternative, a massive vacant industrial complex, is a future they are desperate to avoid. This leads to the next question: will the federal government intervene? The accusations of market manipulation and the significant impact on national processing capacity could prompt a federal response. The closure puts a spotlight on the century-old Packers and Stockyards Act, designed to prevent this very kind of market disruption. A federal response could range from a full-scale antitrust investigation into the highly consolidated meatpacking industry, examining whether a few dominant players hold too much power, to the more immediate provision of federal aid. This could include workforce grants for retraining displaced workers, or block grants to help the community of Lexington stabilize its tax base and essential services, like schools and emergency response. The extent to which Washington gets involved will depend on political will and the perceived severity of the threat to the national economy and food supply chain. It's a test of whether the government will play a larger role in regulating these critical industries. For the ranchers who supplied the plant, the questions are existential. With a major local buyer gone, many now face significantly increased freight distances to get their cattle to the next closest facility. This not only adds direct costs, but also increases stress on the animals, which can impact their weight and quality. This forces them to consider difficult alternatives. Some may explore direct-to-consumer models, a rewarding but challenging path that requires new skills in marketing and logistics. Others might look into forming cooperatives to gain collective bargaining power. But for many, the only option is to accept lower prices from distant processors, squeezing already thin profit margins to the breaking point. And what about the end of the supply chain? How will consumers be affected? In the short term, the closure of a plant that processes 5% of the nation's fed cattle is a recipe for market volatility. Shoppers may see fluctuating beef prices and even temporary shortages of certain cuts at their local grocery store. Over the long term, the picture is even more concerning. Every plant closure further consolidates the industry, leaving our food supply in the hands of fewer, larger companies. A less resilient supply chain is more vulnerable to shocks from weather, disease, or economic turmoil. This could ultimately lead to persistently higher prices and fewer choices for consumers at the meat counter. Finally, what becomes of Lexington itself? The plant wasn't just a building, it was the economic engine of an entire community. The loss of over 1,000 jobs creates a devastating ripple effect. Displaced workers face the prospect of uprooting their families to find new work. This exodus threatens the local housing market, school enrollment, and the viability of small businesses, from diners to auto repair shops, that depended on the plant's workforce. The backdrop to all these questions is the slow, multi-year cycle of cattle production. Rebuilding the national herd after years of drought and high feed costs will take time. Analysts predict at least 2 to 3 years before numbers begin to meaningfully recover. Until then, the entire industry, from rancher to retailer, will operate under immense pressure. The questions are clear, but the answers are not. They will be forged in the decisions made by corporate executives, government officials, and ordinary people in towns like Lexington, shaping the landscape of American agriculture for years to come.